Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Krishna Sudhir, and today we're going to talk about innovation in the Silicon Valley. I want to start with a number, and I want to you to hold that number in your head. And that number is 16,000. What does the number 16,000 represent? Number one, it's the number of lies that Donald Trump has uttered during his presidency. Number two, it's the number of times that Arnab Goswami interrupts his guests during a period of 1 minute. Number three, and most pertinent to this lecture, it's the total number of investors in the Silicon Valley. Why does the Silicon Valley have so many startups, so much investment, and why is it really the heart of innovation when it comes to high tech, when it comes to biotech, and when it comes to a number of other innovative things that it contributes to the world? I think the first major reason is it's a happy confluence of three things. It's a confluence of academia, industry, and investment capital. If you look around you in the Silicon Valley, there are three major universities. In the north, at the north end of the Bay, there is Berkeley, and there's the University of California, San Francisco, which is actually the medical school of Berkeley. In about 1903, UCSF broke away to form a separate medical school, and with Berkeley, it's at kind of the north end of the Silicon Valley. At the southern end of the Silicon Valley, you have Stanford University, an equally prestigious university from where a number of startups have emerged. As you know, Hewlett and Packard both came from the dorm at Stanford, and more recently, Larry Page and Sergey Brin were both students in the dorms at Stanford, where they first designed the first concepts for Google. So there you have it, that confluence of academia, industry, and investment capital. There is a street in Palo Alto called Sand Hill Road. It is estimated that that street alone has about $4.5 billion in investment capital. So it's no surprise really that we have so many high-tech companies and so many biotech companies. It's estimated, for example, that there's at least 1,000 biotech companies between Santa Rosa up north and San Jose at the southern end of Silicon Valley. Point number two, and this is a pretty important point for innovation. Innovation requires out-of-the-box thinking. There are several examples of this principle. Let's start with a company outside the Silicon Valley, namely Amazon. Amazon, as most of you know, started as an online bookstore. So you went on your computer, you ordered a book, and it came to your door. But over time, what they realized they had was a very innovative delivery system. So from an online bookstore, they became an online delivery company, and they deliver pretty much any item to your doorstep. You order whatever you order, it's in your doorstep within 24, 48 hours. That's the power of Amazon as a company. Another example comes from Hollywood. There is a movie director whose name is Oren Peli. He didn't have very much money and he wanted to make a movie, so he approached his friends and family, gathered together a few $1,000s, used very cheap props like sheets attached to string, and he made this movie called Paranormal Activity on a pretty small budget of about $15,000. The franchise was, the rights were later sold to Paramount, and it's become a franchise that's worth close to $1 billion. From my own industry, the medical device industry, there's an example of a company called eValve. eValve was set up by a cardiologist who was interested in repairing the mitral valve but not using surgery. At this time, there was a surgical technique available called the Alfieri stitch, designed by an Italian surgeon, where essentially you just put a stitch across the leaky mitral valve and the leak was decreased. What Dr. Fredson Gore, who put his mind to this problem, thought about was, can we do this without surgery? So in collaboration with Farrell and Powell, he designed a device called the MitraClip, set up a company called eValve, and this company was actually bought by Abbott, the company for which I work, for about $300 million. An innovative approach, an out-of-the-box approach to repairing the mitral valve without surgery, and this procedure has been performed today worldwide in over 30,000 patients. One thing that the Silicon Valley does very well, and this is point number 3, is that they bring the best and brightest from around the world. So this creates an atmosphere of diversity, it creates an atmosphere of cross-pollination, where different ideas meet each other and develop into fairly unique concepts. Think about how important this is. Let's take an example from outside the information technology or biotech sphere, namely cuisine. If you look at traditional American cuisine, it's pretty boring. It's basically steak and potatoes or some variation of that. And yet, big cities in the United States like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles have some of the finest cuisine in the world. Where does this come from? It doesn't come from traditional inbred American cuisine. It comes from the rich diversity that chefs from around the world have brought in. So you walk down the street of LA or San Francisco and you have the best of cuisines from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, all intertwined, and these chefs learn from each other, and you get unique blends that come out of this diversity and creativity. So too in the structure of the Silicon Valley, when you're talking about innovative thinking, whether it's technology or medical devices, bringing in scientists with different viewpoints and different backgrounds often creates an atmosphere, creates a foundry, so to speak, where innovative concepts form naturally and develop to create fairly unique companies. I think there's been a slow recognition of this, and the fact that this is now recognized to be a strength is reflected by people like Satya Nadella being appointed as CEO of Microsoft and Sundar Pichai being CEO of Google, because even at the highest level, it's recognized that diversity of CEOs brings diverse thought that then percolates down through the rest of the company and keeps this innovation going. Point number 4, a major reason the Silicon Valley succeeds is, paradoxically, it has a high tolerance to failure. What does this mean? Only about 10% of Silicon Valley startups, or perhaps even less, will ultimately succeed. So that means that 90% or more of these startups will actually fail. And yet this creates an atmosphere for future success because people learn from their initial failures. A classic example of this is Elon Musk. He's well known for his successes with PayPal, Tesla, and more recently SpaceX. But there were many failures along the way before these 3 successes came along. And even if you look at the example of SpaceX, it's a company that puts space vehicles into orbit. But there have been several early failures, and ultimately there's a lot of optimism that the company will succeed, but if and when it does, it will be based on the initial failures of the company where rocket ships even exploded, either after or on the way to reaching orbit. Likewise, in both the high-tech sector as well as the biotech sector, there's often a lot of failure along the way before a company eventually succeeds. In the medical device industry, for example, in my area of work, it's not often the first or second or even third product that becomes the market leader. It's often a product that's 4th generation or beyond, or the 4th product in that line or beyond. For example, the world's most successful drug-eluting stent, which is a way we treat the coronary arteries, is called the Xion stent. And that was actually, in US terms, the 4th stent on the market. There were 3 that went earlier from other companies. And while making the Xion stent or designing the Xion stent, we were actually in a position where we could learn from the mistakes of stents that had come along earlier, which is one of the reasons that our teams were able to design what is now the market-leading stent, which has been used in over 10 million patients and has a very high success rate. Point number 5. Another feature of Silicon Valley innovation is less rigid hierarchies. What does this mean? This means encouraging innovation from all levels of the ranks. So it's not just senior management that trickles down novel concepts and ideas to junior levels of the ranks. It's actually everybody on the team thinking about new ways of achieving their goals, new ways of inventing things, new ways of designing objects, and so on and so forth. A good example of this is the animation company Pixar, where everybody in the company is encouraged to actually provide their notes or their input so that the final product, and Pixar makes wonderful movies like Coco and Ratatouille and so on, and these movies have been highly successful. The level of detail is often very intense, and it's easy to understand why contributions by every member of the team is critical to getting that final product looking so good. In the Silicon Valley, many startups have 10, 20 members of staff. That's it. They're small companies. And it's easy to see that in this tightly knit environment where everybody knows everybody else pretty well, there is an encouragement to even the most junior member of staff to voice their opinions and to voice their new ideas, all of which play into the ultimate success of the product. Point number 6. Another extremely important point about innovation is that it takes teams to take the original idea or concept and to eventually make it work. So there's a lot of thinking and processes that go on whereby the original idea or concept that somebody thought of is actually turned into an actionable idea and then eventually travels down a process map and becomes the complete product that can then be brought to the world. There are several good examples of this. Obviously, in order for the dream to work, there has to be teamwork. There is no I in the word team, for example. And it takes groups of people to successfully translate these concepts into something that finally works. Take the example of sport. One might think that tennis is an individual sport, but behind the success of a Djokovic or a Serena Williams, there's often teams of highly committed people who help the athlete accomplish their goals. For example, a successful tennis player has behind them a top-level nutritionist, a kinesiologist, a physical therapist, obviously a coach and trainer, and it's these several elements that contribute to the ultimate success of the athlete. So while Serena or Djokovic might take the credit for that Wimbledon trophy, I think everybody recognizes that there is a team around them that actually makes the whole idea works and translates this into success. Going on to point number 7. An important feature of the Silicon Valley is collective ownership through stock options and grants. In small startup companies, every employee gets stock options, which means every employee is in some way a part owner of that company. So when you have a company with 40 people, for example, that was the size of WhatsApp when it was acquired by Facebook for $18.5 billion, you can see that every employee in that company would have made a small to sizable fortune. This is a very important part of incentivizing employees and happens routinely at the startup level. Even in big companies, all of us get issued stock grants. So that means when the company does well, everybody in the company does well. This is a relatively new concept because it didn't probably exist 40, 50 years ago, but now is becoming more and more the norm in the real world and certainly is the norm in the Silicon Valley. And I believe that this incentive given as stock options or grants provides enormous financial encouragement to employees and ultimately plays into the success of these companies. And finally, there is an element that nobody talks about much but is always there, and that is the element of luck. There are so many companies formed every day. By one estimate, about 50 new startups are started in Silicon Valley each month, but only a few of these will succeed. While the product is important, the CEO who manages the company is important, the teams that run these companies are important. Another very significant element is chance or luck, which is what makes the difference between success and failure very often. It's being at the right place at the right time, people needing the product, and everything having to work, sort of a perfect storm of events, which is another way of pointing to fortune or luck or the play of chance. And I don't think we can really minimize or underestimate the contribution of luck to this entire enterprise. In conclusion, I think I've laid out several requirements for companies to succeed, several requirements for innovation to actually take hold. It's not that every innovative company and every success has all of these elements. Some of them play to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the company you're talking about, the field you're talking about, or the innovative concept you're talking about. But hopefully, I provided a roadmap based on personal observations in the Silicon Valley about what it takes to succeed in the sphere of innovation. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, all of you are going to finish your studies and set out into the world. I wish you all success in your business careers. But as you go out and start your own companies and be successful, I would encourage you never to forget your creativity. If you have your passions and your instincts to create things outside the box, you should go for it. For instance, I was a cardiologist for the last 20 plus years, but late in my life, I wanted to bring back some of those creative instincts that were kind of suppressed and buried during the 20 or 30 years of my career in medicine and industry. So I ended up writing a novel. So I would encourage all of you to do the same. You have your careers, you have your passions, you have your hobbies, and I think it's part of being a wholesome individual to actually work on all these aspects of your character so that you have a very enjoyable and fulfilling life. Thank you very much for your attention.